AI companies destroying books. It sounds unreal, perfectly dystopian. One can't help but compare it to 1984 or Fahrenheit 451. When I saw the headlines, even though I absolutely abhor AI, I won't lie, I was a little skeptical. This can't be true, right? Surely we haven't sunk this low. Well, I went into the research for this video intending for it to be a quick chat, which I'll try my best to uphold, but I discovered a good amount of misconceptions regarding the particulars of the situation thanks to a large quantity of headlines from varying news sources with confusing, vague wording and a lack of specific citations. So the plan is to dig into some of those case files and clarify the minutiae before I consider everything in the bigger picture. For years, generative AI companies have faced copyright lawsuits for training their models on different types of entertainment, music, movies, and books for our purposes. But this whole thing with actually destroying books is linked to a copyright lawsuit originating in 2024, where a complaint made by Andrea Bartz, Charles Graeber, and Kirk Wallace Johnson asserted that their written work was illegally pirated to train an AI startup, Anthropic's language model, Claude AI. In the initial complaint, I didn't actually see anything alluding to destroying physical books, rather allegations that Anthropic was obtaining digital copies of books from online sources synonymous with piracy. Quote, Anthropic has built a multi-billion-dollar business by stealing hundreds of thousands of copyrighted books. Rather than obtaining permission and paying a fair price for the creations it exploits, Anthropic pirated them. Going further into those unsealed court documents, I found that yes, Anthropic was cited as downloading full copies of books from sites like LibGen, Books3, and Pirate Library Mirror to make its own digitized database of books to train its AI models on. Although Anthropic does claim that they never used these copies to train full commercialized models. While the piracy of books in and of itself was of course deemed illegal in this case, the actual training of AI models on those works was considered to be fair use under copyright law because it was transformative. Digging further into these files, we get this. An artificial intelligence firm referring to Anthropic downloaded for free millions of copyrighted books in digital form from pirate sites on the internet. So yes, we know this, but if we keep reading, the firm also purchased copyrighted books, some overlapping with those acquired from the pirate sites, tore off the bindings, scanned every page, and stored them in digitized searchable files. All the foregoing was done to amass a central library of all the books in the world to retain forever. Anthropic is further cited as having transitioned to buying physical books precisely to avoid the messy legal problems involved with pirating. They hired Tom Turvey, who had previously been involved with the Google Books project started in 2004, which sought to scan printed books from libraries in order to make an online database of accessible work. I'll add this project ran into the same kind of copyright issues in regards to scanning books without author's permission and housing those scans in a database. So moving forward, Exhibit 21 in Document 554 of this case cites an internal document from Anthropic attributed to Tom Turvey and his mention of something called Project Panama. Quote, Project Panama is our effort to destructively scan all the books in the world. We use a soft code name for it because we don't want it to be known that we are working on this. This document is visible to all Anthropic employees, but you should avoid talking about it in public areas, and the fact that we are working on this should not be shared with anyone outside Anthropic. Evidence for the actual destruction of books is cited in the same document in Exhibit 22 in a deposition of Thomas Turvey, where he talks about buying used books en masse from booksellers, cutting their bindings off, feeding the individual pages of paper into scanning machines where a high-resolution photograph is taken of them. Those photographs are then put through an OCR or optical character recognition software where the image is cleaned to remove background interference like smudges or ink blots or decorative lines and boxes. This then becomes a digital file, in this case a PDF, and it's stored in an online database that Anthropic retrieves from to train their language model. Nowhere does this deposition mention keeping or storing the original photograph of the pages as they were. It also never mentions specifically shredding any pages, which I've noticed is a detail in a lot of news headlines. To uncover some more specific aspects of this process, we'll turn to Datamation, which is the company Anthropic hired to do this scanning, stated by Turvey in that deposition. In Document 560, Attachment 21, there's a packet made by Datamation for Anthropic called Datamation Book Scanning Proposal. The project description is cited as follows. Anthropic is seeking an experienced document scanning services vendor to convert from 500,000 to 2 million books over a 6-month period. Under the project assessment and conversion requirements, it mentions the books being delivered to their facility in Illinois over a 6-month period where books will be cut to provide cost-effective conversion. To me, this suggests that there is a way to do this without actually destroying the books, but it would obviously cost more for Anthropic, so of course that wouldn't be beneficial to them. This cutting is mentioned further under datamation conversion process. Quote, utilizing a hydraulic-powered cutting machine, books will be neatly cut to prepare for scanning. It then details that after the digital files are downloaded, a recycling company will be scheduled to come and pick up the completed books. So there's still no mention of datamation or Anthropic specifically shredding the books, but when paper is sent off to be recycled, shredding is a part of the pulping process. So I think that's where that specific image comes from. I've also been seeing a lot of headlines about Anthropic specifically targeting rare books and conflating that image with antiquarian books. While I don't doubt that they're trying to get their hands on out-of-print stuff, which I think would fall in that rare category, nowhere can I find tangible evidence about Anthropic targeting like a copy of, say, Romeo and Juliet from the 1900s or something. It seems like this is just being assumed, likely because of other articles coming out mentioning how used booksellers, specifically people dealing in very specific types of books, have noticed an upsurge in the amount of orders they're getting, especially from Zoom Books, an online retailer similar to World Books.
For clarification, this was one of the retailers that Anthropic was cited as buying from.
But Zoom Books has denied connections to AI companies. I mean, they might just be lying, but there's really no way to know for sure until other information is released. As much as this aspect of the situation is extremely troubling, it's also very vague and, in my opinion, driven by mass panic and reactiveness. Even that quote about destructively scanning all the books in the world from the Project Panama document feels kind of ambiguous because I don't really think that it's possible. For example, there are books and documents that live in museums or special archives. I believe it's also worth noting that book pulping is nothing new. There's this general misconception that all libraries are spaces that are dedicated to book preservation, which is just not true. Libraries weed out older or out-of-date as well as damaged books from their collections to keep everything fresh for patrons. There are select libraries, for example the university library that I worked in, that preserved scans of newspapers for people to access digitally and kept the physical material in a vault. But again, most libraries are just concerned with providing the best quality, up-to-date information to their communities. When books are weeded out of libraries, they're usually put in a library book sale or sold to companies like World Books, which was one of the places that Anthropic was cited as buying from. If no one wants the books, they're recycled and hence pulped. It seems sad, but I'm just being honest with you here. And just to be clear, I'm obviously not trying to deter you from supporting your local public library. And also know that there are digital libraries like Project Gutenberg and Internet Archive that are dedicated to preserving scans of physical texts. I think what's so upsetting about the Anthropic case is their goal of destruction for the sole aim of AI training. Maybe if something was worked out copyright-wise, we could have those original scans of the books uploaded somewhere for people to access for free. But A, why would they go through all the trouble of something that doesn't benefit them? And B, you know they'd put everything behind a paywall. The question is, and it's a very lengthy question, would you rather have information, in this case niche or previously disregarded information, aka a book rotting on a bookshelf, destroyed or fundamentally altered and then withheld? Now real quick, I want to discuss how that AI training process actually works. And I'll start with a term that caught my eye: tokenized copies. From what I understand, tokenization is a fundamental aspect to training language model, with the goal for it to learn generalizable patterns and relationships between tokens, which are basically small or broken up bits of words. And those relationships are understood by way of mathematical functions. They're stored as vectors or numerical representations of the correlations. A part of tokenization, as I understand it, involves aspects like stemming and lemmatization, mentioned in Exhibit 1 of file number 560. This involves either cutting a word down to its root base or grouping two different forms of a word into one. So the word studying turns into just study. By the way, something like lemmatization is already a thing that is done in linguistics to basically analyze a word by its dictionary term or canonical form. It makes research easier when you're trying to, for for example, analyze how a word has changed over time. In AI's case, it also essentially cleans the text, so there are less specific words that need to be processed. Thus, there appears to be a fundamental difference here between stemming and lemmatization related to historical semantic relationships or real-world meanings, and taking a raw piece of text, cleaning it, and turning it into data which mimics those semantic relationships but relies on syntactic or grammatical predictions. I won't lie to you, at the outset, this sounds a lot like Newspeak from 1984. This kind of reduction of vocabulary into simpler terms. Of course, it's certainly not as extreme, but the idea is still there. A simplified, flattened language. Cultural particularities, social implications, and context are cleaned, so that's why you get that more formal manner of speech from AI. Regardless of how icky it feels, this destruction is still deemed legal under fair use because of the inherent conversion from a physical medium to a digital one. Also, Anthropic is not cited as doing this to redistribute these works under their name. They're just storing them in a searchable collection, so that also clears them on the copyright issue. That means that this trial, when it comes down to it, is really just about Anthropic acquiring pirated books. In July of this year, Anthropic agreed to pay $1.5 million to settle the lawsuit, but obviously we're avoiding the bigger picture here. AI language learning models are being trained on destroyed books, which is bad, in part because, well, physical books are important. And look, I'm not going to sit here and demand that you burn your Kindle or something. What do I care if you want to read Jane Austen novels on a computer? The magical thing about choice is that you don't have to be a freak like me, with a horde of books precariously stacked up so that I have to play Jenga every time I want to read something new. It's probably more accessible to read Hamlet online, but I also have the choice to own a copy of Hamlet with writing in it from 1922. And that's personally cool to me, even though you could probably care less about it. But I suppose a lot of people tend to hold physical books in high regard because of the varying experiences that come with reading them, as well as this transcendent connection to universal humanity that we attach to them. It's the same thing you feel when you see a famous painting in person. Reading from something printed in a specific time, owned by different people, maybe full of messy annotations or notes, also encapsulates the unique existence of the book as something within time or space. Not to mention, different editions of books have distinct introductions or footnotes, which also reflect scholarly and more broadly societal developments and context. Furthermore, a book that was published in a specific time preserves not just a story, but how written language looked on a page, and how people might have found different meanings from how those words looked. A copy of Hamlet from 1603 may contain the same story as a copy from, say, 2015, but it doesn't look the same. Look, I'm not asking you watching this video right now to care about physical books. I'm asking you to care about choice. I have the choice to read books physically, to study them historically, but you also have the choice to not do that, and that's great, but it gets a bit problematic when choices are eliminated under the guise of accessibility for all. I feel like I mention this example in every video that I make at this point, but think about movie theaters and streaming services. Sure, you can watch a movie on a streaming service instead of having to go to a movie theater, but what happens when there are no more movies made to be released in theaters? What happens to those movie theaters? Your way of viewing is dictated by a company's promise of accessibility, which in the long run also leads to them limiting what you can watch and what platforms you can watch on. In AI's case, not just your access to information, but your access to the information as it originally existed is restricted or completely destroyed. Particular ways of ingesting or experiencing or finding meaning from that information are cleaned, condensed, and reproduced into commodified data to be used and consumed. And when reproductions of art become replacements of art, there will no longer be a choice. Although this may feel like something new or these ideas may seem dystopian, this kind of stuff has been happening for a while, and people have been noticing it for a while. Here's a quote from Horkheimer and Adorno's 1947 book Dialectic of Enlightenment concerning the standardization and mass production of art via technology controlled by oppressive economic and governmental tactics. The standardized forms, it is claimed, were originally derived from the needs of the consumers. That is why they are accepted with so little resistance. In reality, a cycle of manipulation and retroactive need is unifying the system ever more tightly. What is not mentioned is that the basis on which technology is gaining power over society is the power of those whose economic position in society is strongest. Historically, there's this idea of the corporation versus the individual human being. Someone makes something, whether that be art, a book, a piece of music, a movie, which is tied to their human soul. A lot of these things are hoarded by elites because of their exchange value, and formal rules are put in place by these elites to make you feel like you can't access the supplies or the education or the money to make art. They constantly tie the idea of good art to money. Enter the corporation, who wishes to profit off of a commodified version of the human soul under the pretense of offering a likeness of that ideal status that elites have to the masses. While the aristocracy commodifies existing artistic objects or the methods of creating those artistic objects, corporations reproduce that fantasy, that feeling of exclusivity in a mass-marketed commodity form, while simultaneously concealing the labor exploited to produce it. When something exists as a commodity, for example AI language learning models, they abstract their own individualized attributes, where those attributes originated from. For example, a raw piece of text, and who wrote that text. It's like plagiarizing someone else's homework, making it sound a little different, and then destroying the original copy. You may feel like you're given some kind of agency or accessibility to those cultural artifacts that the elites value so much, but really, you're getting the watered down, fake, or mimicked remains of what they hoard. I said this in one of my previous videos about slop, but I think it applies here too. Through the front of AI, a corporation is still depending on someone else's stolen labor to make a profit for themselves, while all you get is an ostensibly meaningless image or piece of text. They get the money, while you get the garbage they've tricked you into believing is something that improves your value or worth as a writer, as an artist, or as a human being. As I said in my introduction, this video was originally supposed to be a short chat, but with anything I do, it turned into a days-long expedition combing through those released court documents and trying to understand what was mass panic and what was fact. And I'm no expert on legal matters, but it seems that maybe one of the clear courses of action here is to revisit and revise those copyright laws that AI companies are narrowly skirting around so they are prevented from mass buying things and destroying them. That being said, the situation is not 1984 or Fahrenheit 451 yet. There are still steps we can take to get a handle on this, so don't panic, organize. Contact your local representatives and see what they can do. Maybe drop some ways you might know how to help in the comments. Go out and get your hands on some physical media if you want. If not, you can always give it to me.